Hey guys, before we start the video, my friend Ahmed Matir lost his father to the Israeli army. He's the only provider for his family as they endure the ongoing genocide in Gaza. You can learn more about his story and how to help him in the links below. And as always, do what you can.
At this point, we should all know who Trayvon Martin is. And Trayvon was a black child who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman in 2012. After his murderer was found not guilty, people took to the streets. But while Trayvon's family only thought a few hundred people showed up, it turned out to be several thousand. Tweets and hashtags from the quote million hoodie march flooded social media, and people started posting the phrase that would turn into the global movement known as Black Lives Matter. This would obviously evolve into the movement of summer 2020 following the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Almost 15 years following Trayvon's murder, this culture of racial violence and social media fueled protests has defined a generation. This culture has defined my generation, a generation raised at the intersection of systemic anti Black violence and social media virality. This is the Trayvon generation. Now, before we get into it, I just want to say I'm certainly not the first person to come up with this. A few years ago, I read a book. It was called The Trayvon Generation by Elizabeth Alexander. I encourage everyone to go find the book and read it in full as it really spoke to me. It's a series of short essays that all discuss the racism experienced by young Black people and the art they make as a way to cope with it. But while you're there, feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And with all that out of the way, what are we actually talking about? So, in her book, Elizabeth Alexander defines the Trayvon generation in a few ways. Notably, she centers it on Black and Brown children growing up in what she describes as the quote, haunting shadow of Trayvon Martin's murder. This haunting shadow is essentially the constant consumption of media showing your own community being brutalized. And to put this into perspective, think back to the first time you saw the video of George Floyd's murder. Now, think back to the endless amount of hashtags that were created in remembrance of Black people who were killed by police brutality. That's basically what I'm talking about.
When you're witnessing this kind of violence 24/7 at such a young age, it's going to have some kind of effect on you.
This violence and injustice often comes in many forms, such as police brutality, criminal injustice system, but it's also shaped by factors like poverty and underfunded education. To be clear, none of this is exactly new. As Black people in America, we've witnessed these kinds of tragedies since we were brought here. However, a key difference that separates the Trayvon generation from others is that we were also raised on social media. Our phones served as not only mirrors, but megaphones. They reflect both global injustice as well as our own in real time on a more local level. This sort of collective experience has always shaped Black culture from the work songs sung on plantations to modern day rap and R&B, we've always used media as a way to bond over our shared dreams of freedom. However, what has changed is the speed and scale of that connection. Before the 2000s, solidarity relied on either physical spaces or much slower forms of communication. For example, the Black church was a key pillar in the civil rights movement simply because it allowed for Black people to congregate in person on a regular basis and fellowship together. When tragedy struck in your area, like a lynching, for example, the news had to travel by word of mouth or through things like a local paper. Unless you were nearby what happened, it could have taken days or even weeks for you to hear about it. That is, if you hear about it at all. This is a defining feature of the Trayvon generation. Now, when a Black person is killed anywhere in America, it can be instantly filmed and shared all around the world. That's because nearly everyone is carrying a high definition camera in their pocket, and now everyone has a platform that can turn local instances of suffering into global movements. Let's zoom out and talk about how we got here, because this didn't just happen. Spectacle violence has had a long and ugly history in this country. About 70 years ago was the lynching of Emmett Till. There's actually a key through line between Emmett Till's lynching and George Floyd. And that would be the spectacle of violence itself. The Equal Justice Initiative described the lynchings of the Reconstruction era as, quote, public spectacle lynchings. They were basically treated like social events. White people all throughout the South treated these lynchings like block parties. Vendors sold food, there were postcards, and body parts were even sold as souvenirs. It was Black people being hung from trees and served with a side of popcorn and cupcakes. Now, think back to how many people stood there and watched as George Floyd was killed. For 9 minutes, a crowd just stood there and watched. While they certainly didn't stand around watching with a picnic basket, there's a certain level of virality that's not too different from the antebellum South. This virality of violence is what makes these stories special. Well, what really matters is how we understand these movements in the broader picture of the Black liberation struggle. George Floyd certainly wasn't the first Black person to be killed by police, and sadly, he's certainly not the last. Just like Emmett Till wasn't the only victim of his time. What made Emmett Till's case different was the outcry that sparked after. In 1955, after his lynching in Mississippi, his body was brought back to his home in Chicago. That's where his mother held an open casket funeral. The images of his body spread throughout major newspapers, forcing the country to reckon with the reality they long ignored. In the constant stream of injustice, this moment cut through a lot of that noise. Emmett Till became much less of a victim and more of a symbol. He was a catalyst. Many even called him a martyr. He was someone who galvanized a generation active during the civil rights movement into action. You can almost think of the activists around during the civil rights movement as the Emmett Till generation, unified by the agency to make sure something like that never happened again. And with all that in mind, let's go back to what's happening right now. I want you to think back to where you were during Black Lives Matter. For me, I was just a junior in high school. I was stuck inside during the COVID lockdown. I was scrolling during my Zoom classes. And for that spring and summer, TikTok, it looks like a whole different app. Up until this point, TikTok was basically just a dancing app. But everyone started making videos about the protests happening all around the world. Some of it was certainly better than others, but this was basically an era where everyone wanted to be an activist. At the same time as our own protests happening in the States, across the world was the Hong Kong protests against their own governments. For the first time, I was watching as global solidarity was happening in real time. The Hong Kong protesters shared tactics that they were using in their own actions to better help our cause here in the States. It was wild, but I remember watching a TikTok. It was like a step by step guide on how to put out a tear gas canister with a traffic cone and a water bottle. While I certainly had no use for this information, it showed me how the liberation struggles are connected across nations, especially when the exact same weapons are used against one oppressed people are also used against another. It can actually make you feel pretty small, like you're connected to something much bigger. BLM protesters using these same techniques used in Hong Kong against the American police all before I was old enough to vote in the election later on in that same year. That's a key experience of the Trayvon generation.
But that's not the content that everyone was making.
That's not important. No freedom till we're equal. Damn right I support it.
In using 2020 TikTok as a case study for the Trayvon generation, we can't ignore the performative white nonsense. In her book, Alexander examines the art created by Black and Brown people as a way to cope with their experiences. I want to expand that a bit to include the young white people who grew up around the same era as well, as many of them would have consumed much of the same content. A key difference is that they were basically watching a TV show rather than looking into a mirror. When a white viewer watches police brutality, they might feel disgusted, but it's not the same visceral reaction. When I look at Trayvon Martin, I see myself. I see my two brothers. My older brother was around Trayvon's age when he was killed. And this is obviously much more personal for us. And while white people obviously do also experience police violence, they don't have the same historical or cultural framework to understand how to respond. That knowledge gap is how we end up with, well, this.
Be the same, but that's not important. No freedom till we're equal. Damn right I support it.
To be fair, a lot of white liberals saw George Floyd's murder and were genuinely horrified. Many of them showed up, protested, but not everyone moved in that same way. There is certainly a certain subset of chronically online white liberal that supported the movement, but lacked a kind of political grounding to engage in it in a meaningful way. You combine that with the hyper online culture and you get a incentive to perform rather than to act. Even today, there's still an incentive to virtue signal and post things that show I'm one of the good ones, instead of actually challenging systems of power or unpacking your own privilege. But why does this incentive exist? And for that, I'm going to turn to Malcolm X.
Who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox, and a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to, but the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling.
So, if you've read anything written by Malcolm X, or if you've heard any of his speeches, you might have heard him talk about this fox and wolf metaphor. He essentially argues that there are two different kinds of white people. You have the white conservatives. They're the wolves. They want to eat you and they want you to know about it. Hunting you down is part of their satisfaction. When a white conservative doesn't like a minority, they'll come out and say it. If you're a lamb, you get a bit of a warning and you know how to stay away. White liberals, on the other hand, they're something different. They're foxes. They have the exact same intention. When they catch you, they certainly will eat you, but they go about it in a different way. The foxes might seem friendly towards you. They might make it seem like they're helping you. They might even throw you a bone or two if they think it'll make you lower your guard. But as soon as you do, similar to the wolf, they will eat you in the exact same way. Using this framework is actually really interesting to look at the song choices that a lot of these white teens would use. So, with that in mind, BLM was basically a trend for a lot of these people. It was a way for us to lower our guards. And that's pretty apparent even when you look at the videos that it make and the sound choices that it made as well.
Might not be the same, but that's not important. No freedom till we're equal. Damn right I support it.
Coon chip will activate. It only takes a little bit of white brainwash to activate the coon chip in the average Negro.
So I certainly never even listened to the song in full prior to scripting this video. That's because I just refuse to listen to rap written by white people. But the song itself is indicative of ideas in white liberal culture. Same Love, written by Macklemore, was written in 2012 in support of gay marriage. There was a lot of sunshine and rainbows, Obama era music at this time. But the important thing about this song is that why they chose this one for the trend. Like I was saying before, Black people, we've been making music about our struggles forever now. So why would white teenagers use a rap song written by a white man about gay marriage to show their connection to a Black struggle? It's because it's palatable, it's relatable, and it's not radical. Even to this day, it's basically just gay marriage and abortion rights that every Democrat approves of that is actually popular with a lot of people. Now, I would argue that that's because gay marriage doesn't cost their billionaire owners anything compared to actual popular economic policies like all of these, but that's a topic for a separate video. Anyways, this is just what liberals do. They co-opt movements and drain any actual effectiveness that they could have had. And to be clear, I'm not just talking about a few teenagers online. I'm talking about actual politicians who create the political environment for them to flourish. Ultimately, the white counterparts of the Trayvon generation certainly have a lot more learning to do prior to fully joining our cause. So, 14 years after Trayvon's murder, we're still feeling the effects. Obviously, there's a family who lost their son, another black student who didn't get to graduate high school, and a community who is still grieving today. From the protests against the ongoing genocide in Gaza to uprisings against ICE happening in cities like Minneapolis and LA, to even the protests against the US and Israel's wars on Iran and Lebanon happening as I speak, the Trayvon generation is still in the streets. We're still organizing and using whatever we can to bring awareness and mobilize against our descent into fascism. That's because a bit of Trayvon still lives in each of us. Okay, so hope y'all like this video. This is my first full video essay I made as Black Star Media, so certainly open to ideas for more. I highly recommend everyone go check out Alex Sanders' book if you want to see these ideas expanded on by the source. Also, check out the Black Stars Substack if you want to read my full piece on the Trayvon generation. There's a lot more I wanted to say, and it's all in there. And with that, thanks for watching, and as always, do what you can.